Um, Here's the project I thought might be a good example: to increase the seating capacity of Eden Park for the Rugby World Cup in New Zealand. And I think the seating capacity went from about 40,000 to 60,000. But here are the parameters, and this encourages us to compare them. Scope versus cost, which might be more important? Well, scope in this instance is the number of seats. It's usually to do with size or capacity scope. Which is more important, scope or cost? In this instance, it's going to be scope. Scope or quality? Scope. And finally, scope or time? Time in that instance. It's pointless having all these seats a month after the World Cup. Time now compared to cost. Time is going to be a more important factor. Time compared to quality. Again, time is more important. Quality compared to cost. We'll say cost. It could be quality, but we'll say cost. Is the more, this forces one to make a decision. Incidentally, it's the client that makes this decision, but this is a matrix that will help them get there, because initially clients probably want you to exceed all expectations in terms of scope, time, quality and cost, which isn't practical. Now the score is the number of times that each of these cracks are mentioned. So scope gets 1, 2 mentions, time gets 1, 2, 3, quality doesn't get a mention. That doesn't mean it's unimportant, it's just the least important of the 4, and cost gets 1 mention. So ranking them in order of priority: 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a time-driven project, which you probably realised anyway, but it's quite important to realise that, and it affects things in a couple of ways. If the project is falling behind schedule, we know where to make the trade-off to get back on schedule, and that would be quality. Yes, those seats are probably going to be even less comfortable. Also, when we break the project down, that's how one manages a project, you break it down into smaller projects. It's called chunking the project, down into tasks or activities or whatever term you care to call it, ultimately down into work packages, which are chunks of work that you do yourself, delegate and contract out. We might put a time limit on a work package and say that no work package is to exceed 2 weeks duration in order we can track time more carefully. If it was cost driven, we might put a cost limit on a work package. Also, it affects risk too, because if it's a time driven project, a risk that affects the schedule is going to have high impact in this particular schedule. So it's a useful thing to do, although clients sometimes have difficulty prioritising given they want everything. There's a lot of tools and techniques in project management, but this is quite a useful one. The project and product life cycles, I've shown them there, and of course project managers just spend money. But ultimately they produce the deliverable, which we hope realises all the benefits that are contained in the business case. I haven't put a dollar figure here, I've just shown as a plus or minus, because a lot of projects just defy that quantification in terms of dollars, but they're still important. And ultimately we produce some benefits, net benefits, which are the rationale for undertaking the project. So value equals benefits minus costs. The whole of life costs and benefits, those benefits and costs, they might be tangible and intangible. They might be immediate, intermediate and longer term. They might be direct and indirect, and of course they've got degrees of likelihood, likely and less likely, which we could argue is a business risk. I've shown their first to market projects to make a killing pretty much immediately, and CEOs would probably appreciate those, given that perhaps they'll all come to fruition in their time of office. And then we've got strategic projects, could be a road or something of that nature, where the benefits are not properly realised for some 40, 50 years. Which I might say is a wee bit of a challenge, because in these days in strategic planning most organisations are only looking 3, 4 or 5 years into the future. The hierarchy of project work, just some terminology. An individual or an organisation can have a portfolio of projects, and a portfolio might consist of programs which are related projects or unrelated projects, independent projects. And if we use MS Project terminology, MS Project's the most popular scheduling software package, certainly in New Zealand. I think 80% of those who have scheduling software use MS Project. MS Project talks about summary tasks that are broken down to tasks and subtasks, and indeed sub-subtasks if need be. which are those work packages that I talked about that one does yourself, delegate or contract out. The projects are, can be risky ventures, and some organisations are more inclined to take risks than others, and perhaps risk averse might be government type projects in the main, not always, but could be. Private enterprise has got a chance their own, and I've shown there the Madoff Ponzi scam, which you may or may not be aware of, but that appeared to be low risk with a high reward. Well, it didn't prove to be the case. Project management challenges, which is probably a euphemism for problems, but here we are. An unrealistic goal, parameters and assumptions. That can quite often happen, sometimes due to enthusiastic sponsors who are keen that their project should proceed. Assumptions, you can't avoid making some assumptions. You shouldn't make assumptions where the facts are available, but assumptions need to be made during projects. In fact, here are the rules for assumptions, which I haven't written down, but I now will. Assumptions are risks, but we rather hope low-level risks. In fact, sometimes they might be better expressed as risks and put in the risk log for analysis, but recognise them. A lot of facts masquerade as assumptions. Document them. Write them down next to the estimate or whatever the assumption involves. And 3, validate them. Go back occasionally and check that indeed they are right. The demanding stakeholders and the client-customer uncertainty. In the extreme, clients don't know what they want. And when one produces the final deliverable, they know that that's not what they want. High risk endeavour, INSYS characteristics. You might be aware of the INSYS project undertaken some 25, 30 years ago. It was an IBM police computer project, a total disaster, but the initials are quite useful. I describe them here. If you've got these characteristics in a project, we know we've got trouble. Imprecise definition of what's required. Novel endeavour. Pioneering venture, whoa, that'll be exciting. Complicated. Actually, I remember recently I read an article about what's complicated, and it was about a 4-page article, but in my opinion, if a 12-year-old doesn't understand it clearly after 5 minutes, it's complicated. Inexperienced people involved, including the project manager, hey, and a big scale project. Now, if you've got those characteristics, they can combine to create an estimating disaster. I'll just show you a little bit of maths here. If an imprecise definition reduces the likelihood to 80%, the likelihood of success to 80%, and a novel endeavour and complicated, and each of these reduces the likelihood of success to 80%, then the combined effect of this is now a 33% likelihood of success. That's the compounding effect of risks. You would rather like that they compensated one another, but Murphy's alive and well, and the likelihood is they'll compound to create that estimating disaster. Or plenty of issues, actual problems. Actually, quite a good way to quickly check how a project's going is to compare the size of the issues log and the risk log. Ideally, one would have a bigger risk log than you would an issues log. Issues are risks that we haven't identified. They're actual problems in project management lingo, whereas risks are possible, probable problems, but they haven't yet occurred. When they do occur, they're an issue. Projects given a low priority or business as usual has priority, that's often the kiss of death for a project. Maybe something else I could illustrate here. This is quite typical of what happens in many organisations. On an annual basis, we might be asked for costed bids for projects, often deliberately undercosted to ensure they get on the books by enthusiastic sponsors. And then we discover we can't do all of these. We run out of funds, but we can afford to do those. This is the most important project, and that's going to go ahead come hell or high water. This is the project you don't want to manage, because when this gets into difficulties, where does it get its extra resources from? Your project. So this particular project probably shouldn't have been above the line, but there it is, and it's going to be really difficult to manage, and newcomers are likely to get those projects, low priority projects. Your schedule is not going to work there. You've got to actually schedule according to the resource availabilities, whereas up here you could develop